Have you ever finished a beautiful piece of needlework? Some embroidery, some beautiful counted cross stitch, some lovely, lovely needlepoint, and you think, I don't want to frame it. I want to do something different. We've got an idea for you. I'm so pleased to partner this week with my friend Vicki from Needlework Press. She offers beautiful kits for the lovely tiny counted cross stitch, and she usually does very antique style and vintage style samplers. Well, this time she's got a couple of very small pieces that we are going to take when they're finished and show you how to turn them into something other than a framed work of art. So we have got two options, a pin and needle keep and a little like a pin pillow. We'll call it a pin pillow. So stick with us. We'll take you through it step by step, how to turn your beautiful needlework into something different. Here is the beautiful needlework that Vicki has completed, and this piece of needlework we are going to turn into the pin and needle keep, and we are going to need to do that some ribbon, some needlework, we'll need some felt, we'll need some strong sturdy cardboard, and we'll need some backing fabric. We'll also need some very lightweight pellon or interfacing in order to make this project. So that's everything right there. We will be using a approximately 3.5-inch diameter circle for this project. I found this cup in my cupboard which fit perfectly, so I used that to trace around and to make two cardboard circles 3.5 inches in diameter. And in addition to that, you're going to need to make two felt circles that are 3.5 inches in diameter, but then I cut them on the inside of the line so that they are more like 3.25 inches in diameter. You need a little bit inside, which you'll see as we get to it. And so once you get those pieces cut, now you can take your ironing felt block. You can see Vicki's work is so beautiful that it looks almost the same front to back. But you want to make sure that you place your needlework right side down onto the felt block, and you can see that as I tug on this linen, it does give, and that will be a problem. And for that reason, we are going to use the iron-on pellon or interfacing, fusible interfacing, a very lightweight fusible interfacing, and press that onto the back of this piece of needlework before we ever begin to cut it or to deal with it. Just have laid the piece of linen on my interfacing, and I'm just roughly cutting out a square that is approximately the same size. It doesn't need to be perfect because we are going to iron it onto the linen, and then we are going to cut our piece, the linen and the interfacing, to the correct size for this pin keep. So using the instructions for your particular fusible pellon, you're going to lay your needlework face down onto the felt block. You're going to lay your interfacing on top of that, making sure that you've got the bumpy side down against the linen, because that is the side with the adhesive. And then you're going to follow the heating and the steaming instructions for your particular pellon to adhere this fusible interfacing to the linen. And you can see it does not need to be perfect, but it does need to cover enough of the area that you're going to be working with. And this will really help to not only stabilize the linen itself, but it will also stabilize the needlework, so that when you are working with it, you won't have a lot of give and a lot of stretch. And then it's important, when you finish ironing it, to set it aside for a few moments and let it cool. That will really allow the adhesive to do its work. Now that your work has the fusible interfacing attached and it has cooled a bit, you can now begin to use your template to cut or to trace around this. Now, I did flip it to the back side because I did not want to have any markings on the front side of the linen work. And this is where I really appreciated my little cup, because I could see through it to make sure that I really got the needlework centered correctly. Once I centered the needlework under the cup and traced around it, then I used my seam gauge to measure a 1 inch in addition all the way around this circle that I made. So that was going to be my cut line and allow me enough seam allowance to be able to take this piece and attach it to the cardboard, or to encase the cardboard in it. And you'll see it's a good idea to have a tracing. I am using a pencil here. I had to work a little harder at it to get it to show up, but anything will work. I just do not recommend any kind of a marker or felt tip anything, because it may go through. And this is where you're going to be, where you can see your line. That's really all you need, because now you're going to come back with the seam guide and mark off your additional 1 inch to cut line. Now I'm just checking to be sure that I like the placement that I have, and I am just folding the material back around the cardboard disc that we have cut. Just a moment to be sure. So now I'm threading up a needle with just regular sewing thread. I do use a double strand here because I'm going to be pulling on these stitches and gathering them. So these basting stitches are done at about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the fabric, and they're about 1/4 inch long. And I can usually do about 3 or 4 in one needle and then pull it through. And you're going to go all the way around. And when you get back to the beginning, just make sure that you don't cross over any of your stitches, then they won't pull right. But we are going to pull it up and use it and gather it around the disc. Now, you've got your disc. You need to grab a little bit of stuffing, just about the amount that would sit on top of this disc. And you are going to put the linen needlework, the stuffing, and then the cardboard down. Kind of tuck the stuffing in, and then you're going to start to pull on your gathering stitches to pull them tight. I grabbed the end of the thread and the knot, and I was able to pull from both directions that way. And you can see that the linen just wraps itself right around the cardboard disc, and you just pull it and get it tight where you like it, always turning it over front and back so that you can see that your design is still staying centered. you can adjust it a little bit here and slide it a little bit around the disc. Once you get it exactly where you like it, then just pull the threads tight and make either tie just a couple of knots in it or take a few knotting stitches and to really center it and to really anchor it and stop it from sliding or moving any farther. You can see it a little closer up and at a little different angle here. I have tried to position and center it exactly on the center and to have about the same amount of space between the edge and the tips of the embroidery or the cross stitch there so that it's truly centered. And you can see that it's tight on the back and tied down nicely, and it will hold. Now it's time to prepare a length of ribbon. It just needs to be long enough to go between the two discs and to have enough room to be able to tie a little bow. Now I did miter the ends with a point and then press it down. And I did use a little bit of glue, fabric glue, to make this mitered and stay put. I found that it kept opening itself back up. Now the other thing you could do if you don't have fabric glue is to just put a couple stitches down there at the end to hold it down. That works just as well. And I found that my ribbon was quite wrinkly. So you can see here that I have done the same thing with the fabric, and I have pulled it, done a basting stitch, and I did not use any interfacing on the fabric. It was woven tight enough that I didn't feel that it would fray, and there is no stuffing on that fabric. So unlike the needlework part, it is just the cardboard with the fabric around it. And you can see that I've also cut the two felt discs that will be needed for placing on top of these circles that we've made. So again, just making sure that my ribbon is nice and pressed. It's not wrinkly or creased in any way. And making sure that those mitered ends get pressed down really good and stay down. Then we will be at the point of being ready to assemble. It gets exciting from here. Now it's time to fold your ribbon in half. And you're going to place this half or this center point right in between the two discs when they are lying next to one another. Like this. You need to have maybe a 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch gap in between the two. And then you're going to pin the ribbon down. Make sure the ribbon is placed in the center of each disc. Now I did use my quilt cutting mat to line up my discs level with one another, and then to be able to take and place the ribbon to make sure that it was centered and lined up in line, just like from side to side, so that they did come together exactly, centered. I didn't want one to be out of center from the other. So here again, giving them about a 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch. Get the center of your ribbon right between the two discs. Lay them across and line up your ribbons, the ends of each ribbon, to make sure that they are center, and then just pin them down. We are going to then stitch them just with some thread and just a nice good secure stitch right to the edge of each disc. When we place the felt on there, that will also stitch them down, but it's best if they get stitched right to the edge of the disc. That way you know that your ribbon is going to be good and secure and has plenty of stitching to hold it tight, and it won't come undone. The ribbon has been stitched on, and it is ready to add the felt. I did need to, just a heads up, I didn't get my flower needlepoint or needlework exactly straight. I think I had it sideways. So I did unpin it and make sure that I had my design in the right manner, that I wanted it to be in the right orientation. So here it's all been stitched, and we're ready to apply the felt pieces. Now the felt pieces have been trimmed just about 1/4 of an inch, or maybe a little less, to the inside, so that they do not hang over, and there's a little bit of space around the edges of the felt, so that you'll be able to do the stitching. Now I did stitch them down with what's called a closed feather embroidery stitch. I have a great book that has a lot of embroidery, just a lot of sewing things. I'll try to drop a link for that in the description below in case you're interested in having one. Hopefully they're still around, I really don't know. But there are many embroidery stitches that you could use to affix this felt. You don't have to use the one that I did. Some of the options might be a buttonhole stitch, just a regular feather stitch, or even some of the cool cross stitches, like a cross stitch or a herringbone cross stitch. Those would work as well. Anything that you can use to go from the edge of the disc, which is the material, like the linen side, and cross over and attach and secure the felt with it. So it's really, it's open to a lot of creativity and a lot of options that you can select to make yours completely unique and wonderful. We did choose to use the red floss, and I used 2 strands of the red floss, and like I said, I used the closed feather stitch. You can see it, the directions for it in the book here that I've highlighted. But like I said, you can use any color floss you'd like. I did use 2 strands. If you wanted to go up to 3, that might work. I wouldn't go up to any more than that, and I definitely wouldn't leave it with just 1 strand. That may not be secure for long. So you're almost done. Both discs all pinned down. I realized that I really could not work that way when the pins were in the way. So I removed the pins, and then I had marked one of the felt pieces, but I had not marked the other. So this one I'm going to mark at 1/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to put little marks, just enough to where I can see, and that will help me to keep my stitches very even. So if you're going to do something like a buttonhole stitch, I marked them at 1/4 of an inch in depth, and then I also marked them 1/4 of an inch apart. This closed feather stitch didn't seem to need the additional marking of the separation. That was easy to do. So here's where I marked it for the buttonhole stitch, if I was going to do the buttonhole stitch. So 1/4 of an inch deep and 1/4 of an inch apart. That marking will help you to keep your embroidery just more even and consistent. So that's a good step. It does take a little time, and it's a little tedious, but it is actually a very good step. It does help to make your embroidery stitches much more even. Here you can see how you begin the closed feather stitch. You're going to come up about 1/4 of an inch on the inside, and then you're going to, this is on the felt, then on the fabric you are going to do a small 1/4 of an inch stitch, slightly above that original stitch and slightly below, and coming out slightly below, and always leaving your tailing yarn or floss that you go under it, creating kind of this loop. And now you can see how the pins are quite irritating. I highly recommend that you do not pin the other. Work on one disc and only pin it. Let the other disc just be, so that you don't have more pins to worry about than you need to, and only pin the disc you're working on as little as you need. So I'm going to allow you just to watch closely and see how this stitch is done. Again, you could certainly look it up online or check out the book that I will link in the description for how to do it as well. But I will just let you watch a little ways and see how it goes. So we are going to come up on your first line. Basically, you need to have 2 lines to work this stitch. They can be any distance apart that you like, and they don't have to be drawn on the fabric. You simply can have them imagined. They can be imaginary lines as well. So we're going to come up with your first stitch on the leftmost line and draw your thread all the way through till you catch on the knot. Now, your next stitch is going to be just above the first, right where you were. So you can see that. You can see here that it is, if I draw this line across, it is just above where that line sits and just below. So that stitch is pretty much right in the middle, and you're going to go in and out and pull that through. Except that I forgot the very first and most important part, which is that you want it to be looped under. There we go. So you've got something that's going to look like this. Now, your next stitch is going to be on the side where you just came out. No, I lied. It's going to be on this other side here. So we're going to make sure that you bring your thread across, and you're actually going to go just above that stitch and just below where that stitch came out of, and making sure that you're going over top of your looped thread down below. So you're always going to keep this thread down below you and looped across where you're working. Now your next, once you get this started, it goes real easily and real smoothly. Now you're going to go back in just above that last stitch there and come down here. You're working these stitches in even increments. For me, it's about 5/8 of an inch maybe here. I'm guessing. I'm trying to do it large so it's easily seen. And again, your thread needs to come below where you're working so that it gets caught like this. And bring your thread across. And you're going to go down in just above that stitch right there, and come down whatever your stitch length is and pull through. You can see this great kind of a crisscross ladder effect that begins to happen here, and it's very solid. Go in right where you came out and go down about whatever your stitch length you've determined your stitch length to be, making sure always that you're coming out on top of the loop of your thread from your previous stitch, and loop your thread over and up out of the way, and come down right in that last stitch. Loop over and up, and come down the top of that last stitch. I've not made myself any markings for stitch length, just by 2 lines, so I'm really just kind of eyeballing it. Certainly, if you wanted it to be really perfect, you could mark yourself off some lengths there, 1/2 inch or whatever seems appropriate for where you're working. Again, go in and out, making sure that your tailing thread, or the thread that's in your needle, is coming out. Your needle's coming out on top of that. And like any needlework, you want to pull it taut, but not too tight. You certainly don't want it to begin to pucker. Last stitch across right there, and it would become, which is why this stitch worked so nicely for that pin keep, because it could be done round. Now, just a heads up on that, it will look slightly different when it's being done in a curve, and the reason for that is that you have to make your stitches on the inside of the curve slightly smaller than the stitches on the outside, or the outside stitches slightly larger than the inside, in order to keep your curve going around. But that is the details on the closed feather stitch. Here it is. I made it through and I got it finished. You can see how it ties here, and then you open it up with a ribbon, and this is where you can put your pins and your needles. And you see the stitch turned out pretty good. It was a little bit different than the book because I was working in a circular fashion as opposed to something that was just a straight line. But here you can see how you can just place pins and you can place needles, and it's a perfect little place to keep things. And then you close it up and tie it in a lovely little bow, and there you have what you need. And it can be tucked down inside of a craft bag, or really just any place, because it fits. It's so small and it's pretty well flat. And then I know that as I'm working on something, when I'm maybe getting a new piece of floss out or something like that, I like to just be able to poke my needle in somewhere, and that's why the top is a little bit slightly stuffed. You can't just poke a needle in there to hold on to it for a second while you get a new piece of floss. But there you go, your beautiful little pin keep and needle keep. Now let's begin our little pin pillow. This could also be made into a Christmas ornament since it's dated and it looks very fall and Christmassy. So the first thing I need to do is I need to find the very edge of the needlework, and I'm going to use my chalk sewing pencil to mark a line that is right to the edge of the needlework there, and I will do that on all 4 sides. After I do that, then I will measure a 1/2 inch of a seam allowance and mark that as well so that I can have an exact line of where I'm going to actually be sewing. Once I get all 4 sides marked with both the edge of the needlework and the 1/2 inch seam allowance, then I am going to again turn the needlework face down on my felt ironing pad, and I am going to once again cut a piece of fusible interfacing and press that down onto the back side of the needlework. This is going to just stabilize the needlework and make sure that the linen doesn't give me any problems with fraying, because this linen does seem to want to fray a bit. And then I will press that down and again let it cool until it's firmly affixed, only maybe 5 minutes at the most. And then I will be able to cut right along my 1/2 inch seam allowance, the outside line. And then I will be able to pin it to my backing fabric, which will also be cut to exactly the same size as the cut needlework piece. Then I can pin those 2 pieces together and get ready to stitch it down. Again, when you're stitching something that is going to be stuffed, you need to make sure that you sew it not all 4 sides. You got to have a space to stuff it. So here you can see that it is pinned and ready to be sewn. Actually, it has already been sewn here. And what I do is I sew around all edges, and then when I come to the side where I'm going to leave it open here, I only sew about 1 inch on that side, leaving the rest of it open. But you do want to be able to turn the corner there and have a stitched sewing machine corner. You don't want to try to hand stitch the corners. So you can see here I've sewn about 1 inch around the corner on that side, maybe a little more I sewed. I didn't leave myself much space to turn. Then before you turn, you're going to obviously clip your threads, and then you're going to clip the corners, making sure that you do not cut the stitching that is going to hold the corner down, but clip it from corner to corner. This takes out the bulk in the corner, so that when you turn the fabric right side out again, you will not have some kind of a strange bulky corner. Now the next step is going to be to trim the seam, trim your seam allowance. So on the side that is the needlework, you're going to trim it off about halfway. So you're going to trim the needlework and the interfacing, it's all one piece now, to about 1/4 of an inch. You can see that, and then your fabric is still the same length, about 1/2 inch seam allowance there. So you're going to trim all those sides to about 1/4 of an inch, and that takes the bulk out of your seam, so that when you turn it inside out, or right side out I guess I should say, you don't have a bulky kind of a puckery. That it just helps to make your seam much more even and flat, and just looks very nice. And you're even going to trim the side where you have left the opening. You may choose, I would choose to trim all the way across there. I was going to say you could leave the space that's open a little bit longer, but really you don't need to. So now all of that is trash, and you are ready to turn your little pin pillow or your little pillow ornament right side out. And again, I would have left, was I doing it again, I would have left it a little bit larger opening, only gone about an inch around the corner of that side on each side. But again, hindsight is always 20/20, right? Would have made it a little bit easier to pull this through, but it does pull through pretty much whatever size you leave. As long as you got a couple inches there, you usually can work it through. But it does take a bit just to work it to the right side and to get all of the corners out. And I have a little seamstress hint for you on corners. My mom taught me this so many years ago. She always kept a fingernail orange stick, which I will show you here in just a moment, right with her sewing stuff. And she used that, I don't know why you call it an orange stick. Maybe it's made out of orange wood or something, but it is a little wooden stick, and it is not a toothpick. It is not a chopstick. It is, all those things I guess could be used, but it has this wonderful flat side that you can use to really get your corners square and to bring the fabric completely to the seam. And that's the idea that you're going for here, is to get the fabric turned so that it is right against your stitching, your seam. And you can poke and pick and do all kinds of things, but this little orange stick really is the seamstress secret to really getting those turned nicely. Now we've got it turned and all the corners are just how we want them. I think it could have used a little pressing here before I started stuffing it, but I stuffed it very lightly with this 100% cotton stuffing that Vicki had provided for me to make it truly authentically vintage and antique styled. And it also has a little bit more weight to it. I really did like this cotton stuffing for this. It did give it a weightiness that was very, very, very nice. So I just continue to stuff it little bits at a time, trying to make sure that my stuffing was even across the pillow, but not too full. We did want it to be puffy and stuffed, but not puffy, not really poofy, let's say. So we just keep stuffing, keep working it into the edges and trying to keep it even. Once you get it where you like it, then you're done with the stuffing piece. So like I said, just keep working it around, keep smoothing it out, keep testing it, seeing what you think, and you can see how the edges you're opening seems to really just kind of fold in on itself, and it's practically preparing itself for you to stitch it closed. Now all that's left to do is to stitch that opening closed. I used a couple of pins here just to hold it secure while I was working on it, but you're going to thread up just a regular sewing needle, and you are going to blind stitch that those two sides together. It really makes it almost invisible, almost unable to tell where the machine stitching stopped and the hand stitching started and stopped. So that's the idea. And now here is your beautiful finished project, the pin and needle keep, and the little Christmas pillow. Again, if you want to just add a ribbon from corner to corner, and make it into a Christmas ornament. That would be so simple and just a lovely memory to have on your tree every year of this beautiful stitch work that she did in 2021. Have a blessed day and have an even more blessed and peaceful holiday season this year.